I understand the meaning of it in the context where the one like the Son of Man is the righteous remnant. It says that later in the chapter.
No, I think it's the Messiah. I don't believe it's
You
the
think it's the
righteous
Messiah?
remnant. Oh, of course it's the Messiah. It's
Okay.
clearly the Mashiach, who one, like a Son of Man, comes with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days, and that's God.
You don't see that as a secondary meaning? You see that as the only meaning?
That's, of course, it's the only meaning.
Rabbi Tovia Singer is the founder and director of Outreach Judaism, an international organization dedicated to countering the efforts of fundamentalist Christian groups and cults who specifically target Jews for conversion. You can learn more about this organization and Rabbi Singer's books and lectures and debates at outreachjudaism.org. And before we get started, I'd also like to thank Tom and Daniel with Apostolic Intelligence for setting up this conversation. You can find them at apostolicintelligence.org, and you can find both Rabbi Singer's videos and some of Apostolic Intelligence's videos all over YouTube, especially Rabbi Singer. So, Rabbi Singer, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Doctor. Thank you for joining me.
Now, you live in Jerusalem now. You were in, I believe, Indonesia for a while.
Yeah.
But you're a New Yorker originally. How did you end up in Indonesia, and then how did you end up in Jerusalem from there? You're a real globetrotter, it seems like.
Right. So, yeah, it's hard to tell from my British accent, but that I'm originally from Brooklyn.
Never would have guessed.
No, it's very hard. Most people put me in Louisiana, and I have to say, no, you got it wrong. But so there was a very big issue in Indonesia, which is the fourth largest country in the world. There was a very small Jewish community in the largest Muslim country in the world. But there are also about, 35 million Christians in Indonesia that had engaged in evangelizing Jews since World War II, since Indonesia's independence. So I was asked to come to Indonesia and really address questions, pressing questions that Jewish people had about their faith. And I spent 5 years there exactly. And then I thought it would be a really good idea for me to be in the Holy Land. So my plane landed on June 3rd, 2019. And it's just really, have you ever been here? Well, yes, definitely. I definitely recommend it. Yes, it's very, very special.
I have a good friend, Bill Schlegel, who used to have students come over there from a college in California. He lived there in Israel for 30 years. And he's actually the author of a big satellite Bible atlas that shows all of the sites that we can still identify. And he's told me all kinds of interesting things about it. So, yeah, someday maybe I'll have that privilege. Rabbi Singer, what was it like growing up as an Orthodox Jew in Brooklyn?
So Brooklyn in the 60s and 70s was a very highly gentrified area. You had your Jewish neighborhood, and then you had, it says Borough Park, and then you had, Irish-Italian neighborhood, and you didn't mix with people who weren't Jewish. Then you had the Latino area, Puerto Rican. They didn't like Jews. It was very striking. I was born 15 years after the Holocaust. My parents were born in the United States because my grandparents came to America before the Holocaust. Not everybody, but almost everyone in my grandfather's family was murdered by the Germans in 1944 when Hungarian Jewry was destroyed. And my grandmother, most of the family. So I was seeing people with numbers on their arm was ubiquitous. knowing that they hate you for a reason that just didn't make any sense at all, was front and center. That was the most prominent memory of growing up, is that Christians for some reason hate me. And I was very aware that Jews only perished during World War II in Christian countries. And there was, with one exception, the cleaning lady, her name was Sally, is a black woman. She was a lovely woman. But every non-Jew was a Christian, and they all hated me. And they let me know it. So we always crossed the street to the other side. And I didn't understand why. Like, I had never done anything to them. I didn't understand why they said that I killed Jesus. The whole thing just made no sense to me. But I knew that Christians really were to be avoided. And so that was my world. As a youngster in Brooklyn, it was us and them. And then when I discovered that there was an effort to evangelize Jews, I thought that was the most outrageous thing in the world. Like, you didn't do enough? So that blew my mind away. And that triggered my curiosity to read Christian literature and to be able to respond to the very serious charges that Christians were making, like Jews for Jesus and so on. And I, went to rabbinical school, but then I happened upon Christians who were not from New York. And they were really nice people. So I started speaking about it, but I encountered evangelical Christians who were nothing like the Christians I grew up with, who had a great affinity for Jewish people and Israel, and they were just very nice people. And when that happened, it just blew my mind away. And I had to then rethink everything that I had thought. I had to then re-examine my whole view of Christians and how they felt about Jewish people. So that was the most germane to our conversation, but that was the memory that I grew up with. That was ubiquitous all around me, but it was rediscovering Christians who were really nice people who I guess there's something wrong with Brooklyn. It wasn't just Christians in general.
Yeah, anti-Semitism never made any sense to me. The churches I was always a part of just kind of thought Jews were Jesus's tribe, and why would anybody not like them? You should like them more. But I remember interviewing an acquaintance of mine, Brian Leftow, who's now a well-known Christian philosopher at Oxford. He grew up Jewish in New York City, and he told me about getting beat up after Easter Mass. The kids come out like, "You killed Jesus." This is mind-boggling to me. But I'm glad you survived. I mean, isn't it human nature? When you think people hate you, you just kind of start reflecting it back. Well, I don't like you guys either. But then I've heard you talk about this before, and it seems like at a certain point you turned a corner and decided, no, I love these people. I don't hate them.
Right. So I thought they were insane, frankly. I didn't hate them. I just thought they were crazy. It just didn't make sense. It was just insane to say that I killed Jesus. I wasn't in the neighborhood at the time. It wasn't like they misapprehended or someone had a bad experience with their accountant and they're taking it out on me. It was just made no sense to me. However, I should say this. I would be remiss if I didn't say this, and that is all the church fathers hated Jews. It was not that I was, growing up in some anomaly. When you go back to the patristic period, none of them, whether it was early church fathers like Ignatius or Irenaeus or Tertullian, Athanasius, that's already 4th century, Eusebius, 4th, they all had the most horrible. Chrysostom was a crazed anti-Semite, and the fathers of the Reformation, Luther was a virulent anti-Semite. John Wycliffe he had some very unflattering things to say about Jews, but it wasn't as outrageous as Luther. Calvin didn't care for Jews. So it was I realized it was more complicated. There's something going on here, that because there were no church fathers that had anything positive to say about Jews. So I had to figure out what is happening here, what's going on in the literature. It wasn't just a Brooklyn issue, because, as it turns out, the view of the reformers were all Bucer. It's not that they just didn't have a favorable view of Jews. It was something really outrageous, and it was very, very difficult for me to put that all together. But I realized that there were so many wonderful Christians that I had met that were just lovely people. I will say this to you, that you're a Unitarian, and my relationship with Unitarians and Christadelphians who are Unitarians is very, very different. The whole mood whenever I'm engaging with a Unitarian is very, very different. Doesn't mean there are wonderful Trinitarians out there, don't get me wrong, but with a Unitarian, there's a lot of tension that's not there, because in the view of the Jewish mind, they get it.
Yeah, there is an anti-Semitism that's part of small c Catholic tradition, and we all reject it. I see it as going on kind of a sliding scale. Like when I read Justin Martyr, I think he's rather hard on the Jews, but I don't think he's a full-blown anti-Semite. But yeah, by the time you get into the 300s, it gets kind of ridiculous, especially by the end of the 300s. And I've seen quotes from Martin Luther that I would not dare repeat on a podcast or on YouTube. Like, he's obscene. He's over the top about the Jews. Yeah, so we reject it, like we reject other later developments. We don't see the New Testament as supporting any kind of, permanent blame for the Jews for what one generation in Jerusalem did. But yeah, what I like about a lot of your arguments that you've had with Christians is there's this kind of classically Jewish philanthropic angle to it. If I can make a comparison, it reminds me a little bit of one of my, half of the best comedians are Jews. They dominate this category, way above their numbers. Don Rickles, the insult comic, right? I think he's hilarious. They would cancel him in 10 seconds today, but you look at him in 1970s, like, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're fat, your wife's ugly. He's bashing the Jews and the Catholics and the blacks and the whites and everybody. And by the time you get to the end, you realize he just loves everybody. So he's just kind of ragging on everybody. He's like an equal opportunity insulter. And like, you get hard on the Christians at a certain point in your dialogues with them, but I never get don't tell me how to understand my scripture, but I never feel like you hate them or there's an element of contempt that's just not there, and it's refreshing. I mean, because to me any rational argument is a friendly argument, because if it's a rational argument where you're actually trying to convince the other person and not just like butt heads or talk louder or dominate the other person, if it's a rational argument, the whole thing presupposes a mutual concern for the truth. And so it's just, in a sense, it's flattering if somebody's going to even try to convince you, even of something that's dearly held, that you really disagree strongly about. And so I really like that. I've seen that in a lot of your debates that you've done. I've also seen you talk about it was a particular friendship you had with an evangelical guy in the 90s that really kind of touched your heart in a way.
Yeah, he was a writer for the New York Times, and his name was Nathaniel Nash. He was killed in a plane crash over Kosovo, I believe, Bosnia or something. And he was an evangelical Christian. He wrote for the financial section, so he didn't have any influence over the New York Times' coverage of the Middle East. But he was really such a beautiful person, and that he single-handedly changed my view of Christians. And I realized, you see, there is a difference, I think, because the Jews for Jesus type, what they engage in is not simply saying that the Jews are wrong, but they're saying that we as a people deliberately altered our text, or we're not being straightforward about what it says in the Hebrew Bible, which is shocking to us because, Orthodox Jews, most synagogues in Israel, there's no English in our prayer books or in our Bibles that we read in the synagogue. There are some, because there are many Anglos. 1 out of 7 Israelis are Anglos. But it's people just read in the original Hebrew. That's how, when you're 6, 7 years old, as an Orthodox Jew, you can read the Hebrew Bible in its original language like a newspaper. It's very, very easy to do. So the charge of just being mistaken is not what's being leveled against us. Missionaries going to Papua and telling the natives that they just don't know about Jesus, and let me tell you about him. So that's one thing. But for the Jew is that you deliberately don't believe him. You're willfully blind. Your rabbis have altered the obvious transparent meaning. And Christians they're not bad people. I realize that they're taught this. Many are taught this. I wish I knew Christians like you when I was a kid. I don't know what would have happened, but I would have been a very different person. So I'm very grateful for your thoughtful comments. Just a comment also on the period. The 2nd century, like Tertullian was born in the 2nd century and converted in the very end of the 2nd century. Ignatius, Melito. So these were, all of them had horrible things to say about Jews. It wasn't, Justin also, but not as bad. But in the 2nd century and 3rd century, anti-Semitism had no effect on Jews, because during the 2nd century and 3rd century, Christianity was an illicit religion. Conversely, Judaism was a completely legal religion under the Roman Empire. So whatever Ignatius, who was the Bishop of Antioch, said about Jews, and he said plenty about it, although I'm not convinced that the letters ascribed to him are authentic, but we'll just assume that they are. Anything he said was completely just rhetoric. It didn't mean anything to the Jew. Conversely, once Constantine converts in the end of 312, you have the church becomes a licit religion in 313, and eventually become in 4th century a preferred religion, by the end the official religion. So then anti-Semitism of the church fathers of that period, of the period of the Council of Nicaea and further, so that changes everything for the Jews, because then if a Christian would say something about the Jews, so now it meant something because the empire now was Christian. So the consequences were staggering for us.
Yes. Early on, Judaism was the bigger and older and more prestigious religion, and part of their fury would be Christians might show up at the synagogue so they could hear a learned rabbi talk about the Jewish scriptures, and they did not appreciate the competition. Later on, they kind of eliminated the competition, even the different kinds of Christians. So Rabbi Singer, as a Unitarian Christian, it seems to me like the Trinity, the deity of Christ, second person of the Trinity, this is all just a big distraction because the New Testament doesn't really teach these things. So to me, the core disagreement between us would be the same claim that's the main thesis of all 4 Gospels, which is that Jesus is God's Messiah. And I assume that's how you look at it. A lot of your debates have kind of focused on whether that is true, right?
That's right. So we would completely agree that the doctrine of the Trinity was a much later invention of the church, and even develops much far beyond Tertullian, who coins the term, and it's a self-inflicted wound of the church from which it never recovered. In fact, I could say this, that if a Christian, I've said this, and no Christian ever disagreed with me. If a Christian says to his pastor, I'm not sure if I believe in God, his pastor will really be very helpful in saying, well, let's talk. But if you say, I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in the Trinity, that will get you excommunicated. That will get you thrown out.
Yeah, that's part of the Catholic tradition to say that person is just, a cancer that has to be cut out before they infect the rest of the body. You don't even argue with them, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because, how many decades have they spent arguing about precisely all of those things? Before, I mean, at a certain point, the right to argue was taken away. It was seized by the bishops and the emperor. But before that, say in Origen's time, like Christians simply did argue about all of these things.
Sure.
Even some of your more learned Christian opponents, if they believe in the deity of Christ and the Trinity, sometimes they're just like, okay, I'm just going to stick to, is Jesus the Messiah? Because that's like the really foundational issue.
Right.
Even Justin does this in his dialogue with Trypho. He says, even if I can't prove this guy pre-existed, it is another God, another Lord, and so on. Well, at least, the main claim is that he's Messiah. So they kind of, I mean, Justin has his own kind of big convoluted theory on top of that, but he's willing to kind of fall back on that as well. It seems like another core disagreement, I'm sure you would agree, is about the resurrection claim. And this brings me to a topic of your Christian opponents. I appreciate what you do. You're very eloquent, and you're a very good speaker, and you point out a lot of hard problems for Christians to deal with, of various sorts. But your Christian opponents almost always drive me crazy when I'm listening to them. So sometimes they just have no idea how you're going to go about arguing this in a non-question begging way. So they're just like, well, I don't know, I think these things, right, which are things that you would never grant. And, I'm a professional philosopher. I'm like, what kind of argument is that? Just, I think this, I know you won't grant any of it. Like what? I was at your Nashville debate, and I did not think the Christian debater did well. He just assumed the resurrection, for instance. And you can't assume that when you're debating Tovia Singer. Like, it's not going to just grant that. Right. But, I mean, speaking of that, like, do you have a preferred explanation for what actually happened surrounding these resurrection claims? Or do you just kind of make your stand on, I don't think there's enough evidence to believe what the Christians think?
Right. So as the spokesman for the Jewish people, I'm kidding, but so Jewish people, when they, at some point, like if you live in the United States, the United States is a Christian country. I mean, Christmas is a national holiday. When we discover that Christians believe, at some point we find out, like, mommy, what do they believe? They believe that the Messiah died and rose. So the reaction of every Jew is, but that has nothing to do with what the Messiah is supposed to do. That's really what's going on. So anyone, regardless of whether someone agrees with us or not, Jewish children grow up, Orthodox Jewish children grow up steeped in Scripture. I mean, we're spending all day studying. It's very, very intensive. So you're reading all these messianic prophecies that are very, very clear, very transparent, what is going to happen to the world. And one of the striking things is that while there are hundreds of messianic prophecies, only maybe a dozen of them describe the Messiah himself, very few. And he's described as someone who's a teacher, who gives rebuke and judges among the nations. No miracles. There's not a whiff of him doing it. King David wasn't a miracle man. Isaiah himself was not running around performing miracles. Neither was Jeremiah. There were some, but Elijah, Elisha, yes, there were. And it's an intriguing discussion of why Elisha and Elijah in particular are performing a lot of miracles and few others are. But setting that aside, the Messiah, there's nothing about this, so that when we hear Christians say that Jesus died and rose, and therefore he's a Messiah. We're going, well, what are you talking about? Like, what's the therefore? So that somebody that in that other religions believe fantastic things is something ubiquitous. We all encounter religions around us who we don't believe. We do not believe that on September 21st, 1823, that Joseph Smith encountered the angel Moroni in upstate New York. I don't think either of us believe that he thought he did. That means he had some non-veridical experience that he sincerely believed. So there are. That's in the modern.
I'm not so sure
period.
about that. He's
maybe
he's a well-known cad and liar and adulterer.
Right. Therefore, we don't believe that he simply had an experience that he misapprehended. That means I don't think you or I believe. I definitely don't. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't believe that he really thought he encountered an angel, but he was really a con man. And therefore, we're not impressed. I don't care how many witnesses putatively saw the golden plates. I don't believe any of it. It's just so. And the reason we reject it entirely is because it's just what they teach is so completely incompatible with what we believe in. It's just so different. You know, at least the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had the. They didn't call it the New Testament. They at least called it the Book of Mormon. So that's how we view it. So we look at the claim that the Christian Messiah died and rose, and we're going, well, that's not at all. So no one's even thinking for a moment that, well, what's their evidence? Are there eyewitnesses? No, it's like that's not supposed to happen at all. It's not in the Hebrew Bible. So that's how Jews are always coming at it. And I know to Christians it's very frustrating. But because we are initially only exposed to the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and the Christian Bible claims to be a fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures, you know, unless you're a Marcionite, but they're not here anymore. So Christians, I can see, are bewildered by the Jewish unbelief. But to the Jew, it's like, what are you talking about? Evidence, or he's not supposed to do that. There's nothing in Tanakh. And that's like, would be fantastic. That's
we're bewildered, but we're not that bewildered because it seems like in the Gospels, Jesus has some different ideas about the Messiah job description even than his disciples had. And so, right. I mean, this comes back to my theme of it's incredibly hard to argue about this without begging the question because one of my I met a Jewish New Testament scholar, and she told me the standard joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So different Jews have had different ideas now and then about what the Messiah is supposed to be. Some just deny the whole tradition. But I mean, clearly, Jesus thinks that the Messiah job description is different than even his disciples are thinking at the time. So, we're arguing about, is this guy the Messiah? Like, what do we even mean by that? It's It's tricky.
It is. And, you're talking about Matthew 16 comes to mind where, Jesus asks his disciples, who do you think I am? And he's been hanging around with them for his entire ministry. That's at the end of his life, very close to the Passion narrative. And they have no clue except Peter, who says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says that flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you. It means no one could have told you that, which means that in the view of the Gospels, Jesus wasn't walking around saying, I am the Messiah. And then when he says...
Not quite like that. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it means they have no idea who the man... And he actually says in the same chapter that this is a secret, and it seems in Mark, the first half of Mark, it's somewhat of a secret. And then when he says that I'm going to have to suffer and die, and Peter is flabbergasted and says, Lord, far be that from you. And Jesus says, you get behind me. Now, if Tanakh taught that the Messiah is supposed to suffer, die, and rise, why would Peter go, that shouldn't happen? He should go, of course, you're going to have to do it. And so it seems that was so revolutionary. And it seems to me, I don't know if you'll agree with me, But it seems to me that when Paul speaks about a grand mystery that only he has access to, and the grand Ephesians 3 notably, where, Paul's saying, I have this information, and if the generation that killed Christ would have known this revelation, they would have never killed the Lord of glory. So Paul seems to be stating that he definitely is stating he has completely unique revelation that he didn't get from Jerusalem, he can get from anywhere. But it seems to me that's what he's conveying, that Christ crucified is his unique revelation, and he's not, he's appealing to his revelation.
He is. He most definitely is. He talks about elsewhere that he consulted with the apostles like James and John and Peter, but he's claiming to have been called as a messenger by the risen Jesus himself, which is quite a radical claim, isn't it?
It is, but it begs the question. So that's the opening of Galatians. But it begs the question: if the Hebrew Bible clearly, transparently foretold that the Messiah was supposed to suffer, die, and rise, as we're told in 1 Corinthians 15 and in Luke 24. Mm-hmm. So why does what special revelation is he talking about? I mean, if it's as clear as the church claims to have been, then why do you need, because in those passages in Galatians 1 and 2, he says he didn't get this from Jerusalem, and he actually didn't go to Jerusalem. He went to Arabia. He was very clear. I didn't need these so-called pillars of the church. Mm-hmm. Paul was very emphatic about that. Yeah. So, to me, even after having been exposed to Christian literature, so that's the answer. The answer is that I am, because the question is, why don't I believe it? It's like, why would you? What would be even the basis for believing that?
I understand why, from a Jewish perspective, it seems like Paul's chutzpah is off the charts. Yes. Yes. But I've found a way, Rabbi Singer. There is a way to get around the problem of begging the question, and I stumbled into this because of the arguments that I usually have. Right. So the Unitarians, we have our favorite text, Jesus calling the Father the only true God in John 17:3, Paul calling him the one God in 1 Corinthians 8, and so on. We've got the ones that we love, and the Trinitarians have the ones that they love. And no matter how good a Unitarian text it is, they're always going to just look at it and insist on reading it as consistent with the Trinity. And so I realized that just proof text wars are just kind of a total stalemate. Like, they just don't go anywhere. Like, it kind of rallies your troops to, like, well, here's my text, take that, and then the other guy's like, here's my text, take that, and he's on the majority side because he's a Trinitarian. So his boys are like, yay, but the way around it is by inference to the best explanation. So this is, here are the facts that we're trying to explain, here's this explanation, here's that explanation. What would we expect to find if this one was true or if that one was true? And then weirdly, a lot of times we can kind of agree on what we would expect to find. Not always, but notice that way I put it, it explicitly says, well, let's see, if you're right, then you'd expect to see this. And if I'm right, you'd expect to see that. And so then there is no question begging. Some of your debates I've listened to, when it gets down to like the resurrection, it reminds me of a common thing I see. I like to watch those murder shows, like some kind of soccer mom in America, like Dateline and stuff like that. I find them interesting because of just, humans are crazy. And I kind of like the detective aspect of it. And a lot of it's inference to the best explanation. And there's a very common scenario that I run into with these murder investigations. So it's in cases where there's no smoking gun, okay? So they didn't catch the guy with blood on his hands. There's no knife, there's no gun. All of a sudden his ex turns up dead. And the lawyer for the defense always makes the same moves. He says, there is no evidence that my client did this, right? Nobody saw him do it. There's no fingerprints, there's no knife. there's no evidence, right? And what he means is like compelling direct evidence. Like if you had it, it would be kind of a slam dunk, impossible to refute thing. But the interesting thing is, very often the guy goes down in flames and he gets convicted by a jury of his peers. And the reason is sometimes, even though there isn't that direct evidence, when you put all the facts together, it's like this is the only reasonable explanation. It just seems obviously better than any of the other explanations. Sometimes it's just this guy had the opportunity and the motive, and his alibi is a little fishy, and he told these other people these things. So I have seen Christians and atheists who are philosophers argue about the resurrection in this fashion. So I, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you all the explanations. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. And then they argue that, well, given the facts that we need to explain, like this one seems more reasonable. Philosophers of science have given us criteria by which to evaluate clashing explanations, competing explanations, such as simplicity, fit with other things we know, ability to explain a wider array of facts and things like that. And I've never seen your debates get down to that. Like, to me, that's where I think the argument would need to go. You're pointing out stuff like, who are these eyewitnesses, Well, I mean, I would cite Paul as one of them, but yeah, do we have, it'd be nice if we knew for sure that the Gospels were written by the people they said and that they were eyewitnesses. So you're chipping away at the quality of the direct evidence. Because eyewitness testimony is a kind of direct evidence. It's like finding the smoking gun or whatever, finding the killer's DNA on the body. And these are reasonable points, and they're real. I would like it better if there was more direct evidence. But right. If we have to render a judgment, it seems like we're thrown back on just inference to the best explanation. Does that make sense?
It does, but there is an elephant in the room. And that is the Messiah, very clearly, we are told, is to do things. I mean, we're not told that he's also die and rise on the third day, as Luke 24:44 through 46 tells us. But he is supposed to rebuke the nations, Isaiah 2. The result will be very striking. The nations will put aside their implements of war. I am sitting 62 miles northeast of the Gaza Strip. I can assure you that war has not come to an end. Ukraine and Russia, there are some 27 other wars raging in the world that are not as well known. All that will come to a complete end. The entire world will know about the true God of Israel. It means there'll be only one faith in the world, and the ingathering of the exiles. Granted, about half of all the world's Jews now live in Israel, but the other half doesn't. The temple will be built in Jerusalem. So there's a very clear, the resurrection of the dead. These are such clear prophecies of what the Messiah is supposed to do. So if you want to form a picture, I think what we always do is say, well, what are the clear prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures that are uncontested? That means I don't even have to ask you. I know that you believe that Isaiah 2 and 11 are messianic. I'm sure you believe that, as you do Ezekiel 37. These are clear messianic prophecies of a world that has dramatically changed. And so it's not that I don't believe Jesus is the Messiah or you don't believe that Muhammad really was illiterate. It's not the negatives. For the Jew, I assure you that we're going, well, here's Tanakh, which any 5-year-old can read these passages. They don't need the degrees that I have or that you possess. Anyone could read Isaiah 11 and look around and realize that the Messiah is not yet here. So that's the foundation. It's not that about a courtroom, did Jesus really rise from the dead? I agree with you, and I was thinking about this today, that it is true that we have, so Paul, an eyewitness. So Paul wasn't a Christian at the time of that first Easter. So none of the Gospels authors claim to be eyewitnesses. Christians later came to believe that they were written by eyewitnesses. But to the Jew, that's like, it's not even relevant. Where is the worldwide peace, universal knowledge of God, the ingathering of the exiles? That's what he's supposed to do. That means we don't have to form a picture. If you ask the religious Jew, or if I asked you, why do you believe in one God, in one person, and there's nothing besides one God? You would just quote Deuteronomy 6:4 without blinking. You go, it's right there. You'd go to Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6. Atu Hashem levadecha, you alone, O Lord. Isaiah 46, verse 9. There is nothing besides me. You and I would rejoice together in the oneness of the Lord that we both worship. Why? Because these passages, we don't have to talk about smoking guns. They're just so transparent. But you and I both would concede that there are nebulous verses in the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian Bible which can infer that Jesus was part of a Godhead. We're both familiar with them, right? So why are we both Unitarian, lowercase u? Because the passages about the nature of God, that he's one and one alone, are so enormous, so clear, and these other passages are so ambiguous that we always, in the course of hermeneutics, we always use the clear text to understand the ambiguous text, never the other way around, or else you'll be in a Roman Catholic church, praying to Mary. I mean...
We're back on the dueling job descriptions of Messiah problem now, right? Because we think Jesus was right about that, and you're like, no, come on, there's no good basis for that in Scripture. Yeah, it's hard. Everywhere we turn, we bump into a question-begging point, Like, I mean, would you agree? Would you go this far? Like, if it was reasonable to think, or if it was the best explanation that God raised Jesus from the dead, would that move the needle to maybe giving more preference to like what he seemed to say the Messiah would do?
No, I mean, it's very unpersuasive any more than if you were to find out that Muhammad was really illiterate, and I don't think he'd be moving to Mecca.
He was really illiterate. That's why he spoke out and he had secretaries write it all down. He only talked to people.
Right. So whatever. I mean, that means you wouldn't be moved by these things because it doesn't comport. This can't be, because it's just something so alien to the Hebrew Bible. And that's what the Mashiach is. And I think what happens is that Christians are raised that Jesus loves you and he died for you. And grandpa's in heaven with Jesus. And when you grow up that way, you then have to go back to the Hebrew Bible and say, all right, I would like to have John 3:16 somewhere, something like that in Tanakh. It's not there, but maybe we can assemble a picture so that I could hang on to that. That's what it is. That, to the ear of the Jew, that's what it sounds like. Like, what if Hanuman really was a monkey god? Would that change? Well, it's so incompatible with the Hebrew Bible that, and then what could then be dismissed? Like what, the Roman Catholic Church, which I detest. I mean, I love many, many Roman Catholics, and I'm deeply indebted to Raymond Brown, who was, I think, one of the greatest New Testament scholars of the 20th century, second half of the 20th century. But they're not, their claims of transubstantiation, there are passages in John 6 that I can think of that they could point to, and their veneration of Mary, it's not in the New Testament, but in Luke's infancy narrative, Mary is presented in a highly esteemed way. Their idea, the papacy, is outrageous, but it's not completely outrageous. They at least have a verse to hang on in Matthew 16. None of us take it seriously, but at least it's something there. They're not insane. So we're not persuaded by this big picture of the Roman Catholic. Yeah, and the Roman Catholics have good arguments too about apostolic authority on the canonization, which I think Protestants would have a very hard time explaining why these 27 books. But still you're going, there's no way Leo the 14th is the vicar of Christ. I don't have to ask you that.
I mean, this style of arguing, that we don't expect to see what we would see if you guys were right, and we do expect what we would see if we were right, is really a deadly weapon both against the Trinity and a bunch of other later Catholic developments. And there's another way to look at it too, which is what I call a historical defeater. So take the papacy, okay? They think this is in Matthew. Look, that wasn't a current idea at the time, right? First, there had to evolve the one bishop system, which is still establishing itself in the 200s. It's starting maybe in the 100s. And then you have a long series of the Roman bishop making more and more extreme claims about how much authority they have. And it sort of reaches a peak. I don't know when exactly. The High Middle Ages, really. I mean, they're making stronger and stronger claims all along until that point. So, I mean, the papacy just isn't like an idea that's on the table in the first century. So it's just wrong to read that as what's going on there. The idea of a triune God doesn't really come in. The word Trinity comes in, okay, but it doesn't mean in Tertullian's time a triune God. It means God and these two other beings. The triune God idea you don't see till after the year 350. So that's just, whenever the Gospels were written, they could only be understood in terms of what had gone before, not ideas that lay in the future that nobody thought of. So anybody that rolls up and says that this is an obvious implication of the text, it obviously implies the Trinity. No, it doesn't obviously do that, because otherwise people in Justin's time and Origen's time would have thought those same things, and we know that they didn't. I wonder, I wonder how this interacts with Jewish interpretation. But this is another point on the theme of it's very hard to argue this because we're always sliding into begging the question. So when a Christian and a Jew sit down and think about having an argument about the Messiah, I mean, Christians come in sort of naive, that's the Old Testament. That's just what the Jews believe, right? They don't know about the Talmud and the Mishnah. We share 2/3 of the Bible. Like, how hard can this be? So but, the Jewish Bible is an incredibly contested book. And it strikes me that for any famous passage in the Jewish Bible, there's at least 4 interpretations floating around out there, or sometimes maybe a lot more than 4. So there's whatever the New Testament says about that text. That's one thing. There's what small c Catholic tradition says about it, right? Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8, that's really the pre-human Jesus. It's not in the New Testament, but that's what, Athanasius thinks. Psalm 44:2, my heart has uttered a good word. That's totally about eternal generation. No, but that's what they think in the 300s and 400s, right? So the New Testament interpretation, Catholic interpretation, and then you've got the original meaning, which is what historical critical scholarship is trying to get to, whether it's Jewish or Christian. Like, that's kind of what it's always aiming for, modern interpretation. What did it mean to the authors and the recipients? And then you've got Talmudic interpretation, which, oh man, I've tried to read little bits of the Talmud, and it's hard reading. It's like jumping into an internet chat room with really smart people going at it hammer and tongs, and you don't fully understand the context half the time. I as a Christian, I don't really understand how you get an authoritative interpretation out of that massive mass of commentary. I guess, is it like Islam where there's a body of jurisprudence and there has to be a legal scholar to kind of issue a ruling based on their understanding of it, and then that's how you get the authoritative reading?
But
anyway, so there's 4, but if there's more than one Talmudic one, maybe there's 5 of them in there, or 2 of them in there, and that's, so how on earth, with, how are you supposed to proceed given all of that? I think you have to probably go back to the historical facts and put the texts off to one side for a moment.
So the reason why the Talmud is difficult is for the same reason why, like, you can go on YouTube and watch MIT classes in nuclear chemistry. You could, it's free. You don't have to pay any tuition. These classes in computer science at Harvard are available, graduate level, right? And what happens is we watch it because we're watching a classroom full of some of the brightest men and women in the world listening to a professor who's got to be a genius to teach at an Ivy League school. And within one sentence, we have no idea what we're watching. You know, they're teaching some physics, and just we're totally, why are we lost? The classroom seems to be on board. Well, that's what the Talmud is. Well, the reason why, and I'm just going to presume that you're not an expert, you're a mathematician of some sort. So
Philosopher.
The reason why, you're a philosopher, but you know, you're not a. So the reason we're lost is that if you get into MIT and you're at a graduate level course on physics, it just presupposes that you know all this stuff, and therefore the professor doesn't have to explain these things. They just start talking about things, and then I'm completely lost. Almost everyone is lost. I have no idea because the professor there's an unwritten contract with the classroom, and that is we all know this stuff. We're not teaching arithmetic here. That's what's happening with the Talmud. The Talmud has missing thoughts because it's from a sage to his disciple. They know it, so they don't have to say these things. So if you read the Talmud, let alone the Talmud's in Aramaic, that doesn't make it easy. There are no commas. So it's the largest work.
I was reading bits of this. Yeah.
It's all missing thoughts, and so there's no grammar, there's no period, no question mark, there's nothing. It's just that's why a person is lost, because the authors of the Talmud, I mean the writers of the Mishnah, they were on such a level that they just, of course, you know the unsaid word. That's why you need so many commentaries for ordinary people. But I want to just get back to the question for you, because you're a scholar. If you were born and your family wasn't Christian, and all you had was the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish scriptures, would you go, where's the dying, rising Messiah? Would you be a Christian? Would you, if you read the Hebrew Bible and just had you were never exposed to anything Christian at all, would you be looking for a Messiah that died and rose for your sins?
I mean, if I was stuck on a desert island with a copy of the Tanakh, I don't think I would. Yeah. Just like Jesus' disciples, I'd be in the same boat with them. But what would I think? It would probably depend. I mean, I wouldn't be on a desert island probably. It would probably depend on my interactions with Christians, whether I thought, God was at work among them, or whether this was just a terrible mistake and no good can really come of this. It probably depends on kind of other extra scriptural experiences and convictions.
I believe that in a person who all he can do is read biblical and understand biblical Hebrew fluently was given a Tanakh, I don't think that anyone would think Christianity. When I use the word Christianity, I just mean it. I don't mean it. No one would be looking for a Messiah who would die and rise. The passages of what the Mashiach is supposed to do are so clear and so enormous that claims like the Messiah is supposed to rise from the dead, that's a fantastic claim. That's not an ordinary claim. The amount of evidence required for that claim would be, you'd have to have things like John 3:16. You would have to have those kinds of passages. John 17:3. You use that passage to demonstrate that the author of the fourth gospel was a monotheist. But that passage is saying, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, of the only true God. So you would just, I don't think anybody reading the Hebrew Bible without any exposure to Christianity would ever even think that that's there. It would,
Yeah, I mean, if I was raised Jewish, honestly, it would depend probably also what I thought when I read the New Testament. Am I impressed with this Jesus, or do I think he's kind of full of it? Do I think he's deluded? Do I think he's a bad guy? When I think about arguing with religions, I really think there's kind of a cult leader disqualifier. So there's a standard cult leader playbook, right? It's always about power, sex, and money, in some order. And so to me, Muhammad is the most successful one of those guys ever, right? Because he got more power, more sex, and more money than everybody else. The system was designed for him. The theocracy was designed for him. Joseph Smith, shining example, right? So if I came to find that out about Paul or Jesus or John, I'd be out. I'd probably be Jewish, not Christian. Okay, but I don't find those disqualifiers. I don't see, Jesus getting rich off of this, or just kind of getting his way, or getting all the good-looking girls. It's not just Abrahamic religions. You could use the same criteria for Buddhist cults and religions and so on. They're notorious for these kind of guys. So it passes that test, but yeah, it would depend. It would depend on what I thought of Jesus and what I made of the whole resurrection thing. And again, if there was overwhelming evidence, that would be one thing, because then you'd just be a pig-headed whatever for not believing it. But I don't think it's that overwhelming. So again, we're thrown back on inference to the best explanation. But that doesn't mean it's unanswerable. We put people to death on the basis of inference to the best explanation. At least we do in Texas, where I'm from. Maybe not in New York State. But so sometimes we're very, very convinced, even though, we kind of wish we had super direct evidence, but we just don't. But we still look at the whole constellation of available facts and we're like, oh, that guy did it. You're right. It's an unusual claim. It's an extreme claim. I mean, people don't just rise from the dead all the time. We have in the Jewish Bible, prophet raising someone from the dead, but so we know it can happen if we just believe in God. That has to be part of the background too. I think if you believe in God, you're going to look at the probabilities differently than if you're an agnostic or an atheist. Which,
I never.
If I was raised Jewish, would I be agnostic or atheist? There's actually a very good chance, right? I was a professor in one of the SUNY colleges in New York State for 18 years, and my two best friends were two New York area Jews, but both atheists. But we got along very well. Our interests in philosophy were weirdly kind of somewhat compatible, even though I totally believe in God and they don't. But that's partly why I've never been an anti-Semite. That's partly why I'm the opposite of an anti-Semite, whatever that is called, because I love those guys so much. Anyway, but I digress. Yeah, so here's another complication. Ahead. Okay, since I'm just muddying the waters and making everything hard. So take one of the most disputed texts, which you have very strong objections to the Christian reading of, Isaiah 53. So your average Christian's like, oh, that's just obviously about Jesus. It couldn't possibly be about anybody else. And so you say, look, our scholars say, your modern scholars say, like in your study Bible and RSV or whatever, that this is about the righteous remnant of the Jewish nation. And then your average Christian is like, we think this is about Jesus. And then now we're kind of at a stalemate, right? Because, well, it's obviously not about Jesus, you say, and they say, well, that's what we think it obviously is. And, I think these Christians are making a mistake, and the mistake is thinking that it can only have one meaning. So when you look, New Testament scholars call this the New Testament use of the Old Testament topic. And just look at some of the obvious examples the second you start reading the New Testament, right? Out of Egypt I've called my son. that was originally about the Jews.
About Israel.
This baby called Emmanuel, like that's a baby in the time of Isaiah, right? It's just obviously, as you could just go read it. So what on earth is going on? And this is what bugs me the most about most of your Christian opponents. They failed to bring out how a bunch of Jews could have come up with this, by a bunch of Second Temple era Jews who believe in Tanakh and probably are most influenced by the Pharisees, kind of the precursors of the rabbis. Like, how on earth could they come up with this? Because it was all Jews at the beginning, right? And so it seems like they obviously had thought that because it's inspired by God, kind of meticulously inspired, every jot and tittle. Well, God very well could know a meaning and a second fulfillment, a second meaning that wasn't known to the prophet at the time. So that seems to be what's going on, right? And then, okay, but now we're back to a stalemate because you're probably not going to grant that it has a second meaning. I don't know. Do you allow in general that a prophetic text could have more than one meaning and more than one fulfillment?
Yeah, but then you get into more trouble. Like, for instance, Isaiah 7:14. If it was fulfilled multiple times, as an example, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. So that means that there was a virgin born in the time of Isaiah, 2,700 years ago, in the heart of the Assyrian Empire. And there's another virgin who conceives 2,000 years ago. But then there's a problem, and that is it's the Afro-Syria war, we're told very clearly. And therefore, we're told in verse 15, 16, that butter and honey will the child eat before he knows to reject evil and choose good. For before the child knows the difference between good and evil, these two kings that you despise will be obliterated, will be destroyed. So the problem, is always the problem. As Mark Twain said, the problem is when you lie, you can't keep track of all of it. I don't mean that, God forbid, disparagingly. The moment you introduce any device to solve a massive problem, if you're not correct, everything else completely collapses. So what happens is of course there could be a double meaning, of course, but that's more problematic because who is the virgin in the time of Isaiah? Is there another virgin? Of course, I believe if God wanted a virgin, well, I want to steelman this. So of course, God can, as a believer, that would be a minor miracle for a virgin to conceive. We've never witnessed it among humans, but we see parthenogenesis occurring in the animal world. That'll be nothing. Sarah, an old woman, post-menopausal, her conceiving and having a child is far more miraculous from a from medical standpoint. That's much more difficult. Of course, God created the earth from nothing. That's not the issue. The issue is Christianity the true? Christianity is making the claim that I can prove to you, I can demonstrate to you that Jesus is the Messiah based on hundreds of prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. If that's not someone's claim, but someone's claim rather is the kind of claim that perhaps Hillary Clinton would make. She's a liberal Christian. She's a Methodist, but quite liberal. So she would probably say, I don't really believe it's there. I just, on faith, spiritually. So if you want to just say, I believe Jesus talks to me. But the argument of the church has always been, and Paul makes this claim, that it is all based on the scripture of the Hebrew Bible, clear, 2 Timothy 3:16. It's only scripture that. So that the standard is very, very high, and then these dual fulfillments and so on, it doesn't work, and it becomes very elastic. And then what happened to the clear passages? That means we have maybe 7 very clear things the Messiah is supposed to do. Very clear, and no one would disagree with that. And somehow those are all relegated to a second coming. And everything that Jesus did fulfill, being conceived supernaturally, born in the city of Bethlehem, dying and rising the dead, all of those claims that he has supposedly has already fulfilled, none of those are verifiable. But if he had brought world peace and built the temple, we would know it. So people are looking and going, wait, but he didn't do the things that are very clear, and everything he putatively has done, born in Bethlehem. All right, that's the reading of Micah 5, based on Matthew 2:6. But how would I know if he was born in Bethlehem? There's no way to know that. But if he had changed the world and there was world peace, we'd sure know about it today. In the first century, there was no peace. The temple was destroyed. I don't know if I can persuade you, but I want to give you at least the view of how the Jew views the scripture. Let's get the clear stuff down. And then if you want a secondary and third reading, you're entitled to a homily, but one cannot dismiss the plain meaning of a text. And I think that's why you're a Unitarian. It's not that Trinitarians have nothing. You know, they have the Great Commission. That's how Matthew ends. But it doesn't say there that all three are God and one and distinct. It doesn't say all of that stuff. The only passage that you can find that does clearly convey the doctrine of the Trinity is a scam. And that's a passage that was interpolated into the first epistle of John, chapter 5. And we all know that was inserted later. Now, why did they insert that spurious passage? We all know the answer. And Erasmus finally was persuaded to stick it in his second publication. The reason is because somebody snuck it in a Latin translation much earlier on. Yeah, but why? I mean, someone invented a passage that is not authentic to the first epistle of John. But why do they put it in there? The answer is, we know the answer. The answer is because there is no passage that encapsulates the Trinity in the New Testament, and they needed one, so they shoved it in there. That's the point. The story, as you said, with Erasmus in the early 16th century, man was a genius and an honest man. He would have certainly been a Protestant if he didn't need the Pope. He was an honest guy, but his arm was twisted, and he was accused of all sorts of horrible things when he left it out as for So the key is, why do they have to put it in there? They had to put it in there because it's a scam, and they had to put it in there to find support for it. So we don't look for these sort of things that infer. Let's get the clear passages down, and then if you want to have a second, third meaning, as long as it doesn't contradict the plain meaning, we're good with that.
Here's a comparison for you. My Jewish colleagues, I had debates with them, kind of formal philosophical debates. And my one friend, I debated the existence of God with. And I mean, imagine that you're debating the existence of God with him. He's an atheist and a naturalist, right? He thinks the natural world is all there is. I mean, there isn't anything you can point at to him that's like empirically verifiable exactly, like that can be currently observed. He's not going to grant you that scripture is inspired. He's not going to even grant you that miracles happen. Any kind of spiritual experience you have, he's just going to think that's just kind of your brain got overheated and then something weird happened. You had too many, you ate too much before you went to bed and you had a weird dream or something. I mean, what you're going to do is you're going to fall back on inference to the best explanation, history of the Jews, the scriptures, maybe creation, and just observing like apparent design and creation. And I think it's kind of similar in that it's so hard to find common ground that we're kind of back to that. It's interesting that you would grant that there could be multiple meanings and fulfillments. I mean, I think you should. That's reasonable. Because why couldn't the Almighty do that if he wanted to?
But not in apologetics. That means if you want to give a sermon in church or synagogue Saturday or Sunday, do what you want. We do it. Everyone does it. But in the area of apologetics, that is completely illicit. Apologetics means that we have a common belief, right? And then we have a different view of how to interpret it. And we have to only use the plain meaning of text in apologetics. The standard, the bar is completely different. So, of course,
because you have to go off common ground. Otherwise, you can't move them unless you meet them on common ground and then move them.
it would be like me convincing you to be a Jew because of the Talmud, but you don't believe in the Talmud. So it doesn't make so. I think you would agree with me that in the area of apologetics, where we're trying to persuade each other based on evidence, we have common ground. And with an atheist, you're right, it becomes difficult. But with you and I, especially you, because truthfully, I hide my admiration for you. You didn't have to go down this road. You could have been a Trinitarian and just behaved like a good boy, and but you didn't. And you risked a lot and possibly lost a lot socially, academically. I don't know. I didn't have to make any of those sacrifices to be a Jew. So I admire you and other Unitarians deeply for having the courage. So
I was not cool. I was not cool enough to run with the cool kids, but yeah, I definitely lost out on some social opportunities. Yeah, and probably
so
job opportunities.
In the area of apologetics, the bar is very high, and the only passages that can be appealed to are those that are clear and that we agree on. And in that world, that there's a secondary meaning, a third meaning. So then what really could, if it's that elastic, then what religion could be dismissed? And, what reform, people who are Calvinists, they have passages. I think Calvinism is insane. But there are verses in the Christian Bible that they can appeal to in Romans and in John. It's just, they're so wrong. But there are passages, but it's just the passages that push against that are push against limited atonement, which is the most fragile part of Calvinism, so overwhelming that whatever you're going to bring from Romans is just not relevant. It doesn't approach, in my view. So in apologetics, the standard is very rigorous. It does not allow for secondary thinking. It's okay if you want to give a homily, but it's not okay in apologetics.
Well, Rabbi Singer, in your view, the famous scene in Daniel 7, the way you understand that, is that I understand the meaning of it in the context where the one like the Son of Man is the righteous remnant. It says that later in the chapter.
No, I think it's the Messiah. I don't believe it's
you think it's the Messiah?
Oh, of course it's the Messiah. It's clearly the Mashiach, who one, like a Son of Man, comes with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days, and that's God.
You don't see that as a secondary meaning? You see that as the only meaning?
Of course it's the only meaning. And people who don't, for the viewers, not for you, for the viewers, Daniel 1 through 6 is very easy. It reads like Genesis. Anyone can read it and immediately get it. Daniel 7 through 12 is not easy. It's not incredibly difficult, but so Daniel 7 is very clearly 5 kingdoms come into view. The first 4 we know. And then it's the kingdom of the Mashiach, who's one in a vision like a Son of Man with clouds of heaven, because the Festival of Tabernacles is in view. People who trust in the clouds rather than people who trust in the roof, the Gog. And God makes him king, and to him all nations will serve. That's clearly the Mashiach.
Interesting. Yeah, that seems to be what some of the characters in the New Testament think that. Some of the Jewish people in the New Testament seem to have this as a common assumption. It seems like it's relevant to some of the things that you debate. It says that all peoples and nations of every language must serve him.
Yes.
That kind of sounds like religious worship, although it already has told you the Ancient of Days is this other guy, and that he's awarded all of these high status by the Ancient of Days, right? The Christian view is that you see this in the vision in Revelation 5. So if Jesus, or like Paul says in Philippians 2, if Jesus is worshipped to the glory of God the Father, they're like, what's the problem? That's not worshiping a rival God or something like that.
So the term there is to serve, and it's unfortunate that some translate. Folchen means to serve, and it's Aramaic. Daniel 7 is in Aramaic, like from chapter 2:4 to the end of 7. So the word there means serve, and in fact, this is all over Tanakh, when talking about the Messiah, that all nations will adhere to him. He will give hoichacha to the nations, Isaiah 2, which means rebuke. He will judge among the peoples, and they're all going to follow everything he says. They'll take the swords and spears and turn into plowshares and pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. Out of Zion will go forth the Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. So Daniel 7:13 and 14. So the words, it just means serve. Like in a marriage contract, it's called a ketubah, which is not biblical, but it's a marriage contract that a groom gives to his bride. He promises to serve her. That's a promise he makes underneath the wedding canopy. That document is written in Aramaic. So that's
You don't think it has a kind of meaning of religious worship or something similar to the worship that's given to God?
No, if you look in the Targums as an example, you find that when Jacob served Lavan, it's the same exact word. He didn't worship Laban. I don't know how they say it, anglicized. No, it means serve. Now, you and I, we're English speakers, so we can, our waiter can serve us, or we could say that the Secretary of State, Rubio, serves the president.
Yeah. It's very context dependent. Yeah.
Of course, totally. Now, it is true, I granted, that I did this once. I went online and I looked up Presbyterian Church hymn book out of nowhere, a PDF. And of course it's available free because Presbyterians have all these hymn books. And then I did a Control F, which is a search device, and I looked up the word serve, the English word serve, and as it turns out, in every single case where the word serve appears in a Presbyterian church hymn book, it's referring to serving God or Jesus, right? But that does not mean that the English word serve means or conveys in any way or can be used to say, therefore, it means worship in any way. So the word falcon simply, it's true. The Tanakh is a religious book. It's a holy book. So even in English, I'm sure if I looked up the word serve, the vast majority of times that in, let's say King James, whatever, that word would mean serving God, but it's because it's a religious book. It's not because of the English word serve. That's an etymological fallacy, means or conveys worship. And if someone were to say this is about Jesus, Daniel 7:14, well, then you are only hiking up the problem because, as it turns out, the majority of the world doesn't believe that Jesus doesn't worship him or serve him or any of those things, and the church is widely hated in the world.
Not yet.
Right. That means a person would have to do the not yet. Right. But the claim of the church is that yet. The claim of the church is that there's evidence, and it's not ambiguous, but there's clear evidence. So that kind of claim is exposing itself to ridicule. So if someone says Daniel 7:14 is about Jesus, and now you've only added to the problem rather than diminished from it, because that hasn't occurred. But we do believe it's talking about the Messiah, and of course those are the four kingdoms that had sovereignty over the Jewish people prior to it, and we look forward to the Messianic age.
Mm-hmm. Well, Unitarian Christians like me are always pointing out that in the Judaism of Jesus's time, and more generally in Second Temple Judaism, the one true God is a single someone, variously called the Lord, Adonai, King of the universe, Father. But in an apologetics context nowadays, some push back and say, no, the Jews in this time believed God, well, maybe not tripersonal, but how about at least multi-personal? Because you have the Memra and the Targums, the angel of the Lord, and let us make man in our image. What's your view of this scholarship? There actually are a few Jewish scholars pushing this nowadays.
Well, calling them Jewish scholars like calling Karl Marx a Jewish thinker and economist. People who happen to be who happen to be of have Jewish relatives, but these are not Jewish ideas. Where it really comes, first of all, it comes from a very legitimate problem. In that, in the Hebrew Bible, those who represent God, namely prophets and angels, are called God. This is extremely inconvenient, but when Genesis tells us that Jacob wrestled with what seems to be God if you're just reading the Bible, but it's really an angel, and that's clarified in Hosea 12. So this is very inconvenient. You and I are both very aware that judges are called God in Exodus 21:20. So you have to be aware of that, and therefore you have to have that context. And Moses is called a God in front of Pharaoh, and this is not the way we speak in the 21st century. So that's one problem. And this is a real serious matter, and this is a good reason why Trinitarians feel that, but you have to look at the context. An angel really is an angel. There's a second issue that most people, I think, miss, and that is in the secular academic world that has a deep antipathy for Judaism or Abrahamic religions. They have it in for us. So they have a problem, and the problem is that monotheism in the ancient world didn't make any sense. In the Bronze Age, it made no sense that there was one God and no other, because they knew nothing about science and microbiology and DNA. They didn't know what an earthquake was. So if the Jews always believed in one God, so our view, your view and my view is that originally the progenitors of the Jewish people believed in only one God, and then there was a mutation where people started to mess up and attribute to the Son and to other things that God had created divinity. That's what we never had this conversation. I presume, I'm sure we agree on that.
Do you take the line like some scholars do that monotheism is like an inappropriate term for ancient Jews and Christians?
No, I think it's the perfect term because it's only God.
Because I disagree with it. I'll tell you why in a second, but yeah. Keep going.
I love it. It's only because mono doesn't mean one. It means only. It conveys alone. Like you were quoting John 17:3, where we have that only, right? So it's very critical. So the academic world can't stand this. I mean, the academic world, and I'm interviewed very frequently on atheist shows, they don't like this idea, so therefore they engage in the idea that the original Jews really were polytheists and believed in Canaanite gods, and at some stage there was a mutation away where some groups started to believe in one God alone, and that is sort of kind of like evolution, and that survived, and all the other ones fell away. And there was always other groups that this idea would just come back, and the Jews would just keep pushing away. But that's the view at Yale Divinity School, which is putatively a Christian school. That's the view at Harvard Divinity School, which is putatively a Christian school. But they're quite liberal. So what these people do in the academic world is they have to go back to these ambiguous texts and use them to overthrow the clear texts, engaging in that kind of sophistry in order to advance what they already believe. And then, of course, Trinitarians are very delighted to find people with fancy titles who've written these books, who've done all the hard work, and say, the original Jews believed in many gods, and the angel was the Lord of the...
or they're henotheists or something.
Yeah,
like
they're henotheists,
halfway to monotheism.
Right. That's what's really going on here. So that's why you have this. Here you have Trinitarian Christians, Southern Baptists, devout. I have tremendous respect for them, and devout Roman Catholics. But they're in a little bit of trouble, and they will very happily appeal to secular academics who believe a documentary hypothesis. They believe Isaiah is written by 3 authors. They believe that Daniel is a complete forgery. I mean, all that stuff. All these guys, they would laugh at you if you quoted Daniel 7. They would tell you Daniel 7 was written as a forgery. It was written during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, during the time of Hanukkah. So what they do is they're playing a game, and that is they're appealing to academic scholarship, which fiercely opposes what you and I believe. And may I, one other thing to say to you, and I want to, not you know this, but the viewers don't. The academic world rewards anything that's new and innovative, which is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you write a thesis,
Philosophers
a
are
dissertation?
kind of bad about this.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's a problem because what you and I believe in is it's the old original. You can't write a dissertation on that the old idea was really the right idea. You'll get thrown out on your head. So therefore the academic world is married to something that would nourish people looking for something odd on the outskirts to say, that's the original. And that's why there's so much friction, I believe.
Yeah, no, this monotheism issue is interesting, and I've actually published a paper on this that I think is my best thing that I've published. It's called On Counting Gods, and I claim this is all just confusion on stilts. So they say things like monotheism was coined in the 1700s, early 1700s, late 1600s. This is besides the point. The point is, what about the concept, right?
Of course.
The concept can be there if you don't have an abstract term to express that concept. Still, the idea can be there. My main claim is that the term God, if you say there's one God, is ambiguous. So there's a looser concept, which I claim is in all the cultures of the world, where a deity, I call it the concept of a deity, is basically just a super powerful self. It's a someone much more powerful than any ordinary human. Maybe they used to be a human. Maybe they earned their way up. They worked their way up somehow. Maybe they were born a god, whatever. There's all kinds of different, these are the gods of the mythologies of the world. But then there's the monotheistic concept of a god, which is a deity, which is ultimate. So it does not come from anywhere. There's nothing farther back. There's no higher explanation for everything. If you ask, why does the world exist, you end up with this. And if you ask why God exists, it's just because God can't not exist. So when you say there's only one God, if you mean, is there only one deity? Well, Jews and Christians have almost never said there's only one deity, because the angels are going to count and demons are going to count as Elohim or Theoi. Mm-hmm. What's confusing is, as time went on, you see this in the Jewish Bible, more and more they reserve the word God for the one true God. But there's still an older usage. And in the New Testament, they almost always use the word theos for the one true God. Although weirdly Satan gets to have it once. So yeah, the idea that there's no ancient monotheism, I think, is just wrong, because they were monotheists because they believed there was a deity that was necessarily unique. That's the ultimate reality. That's the ultimate source of everything else. That's the creator. That precisely is monotheism. It doesn't matter how many unseen, powerful beings are running around in addition to that God. So I distinguish the concept of a mere deity from a God. And a God has to be ultimate, basically. So, right. Yeah, then you can have Hindu monotheism. You can have monotheism in traditional African and Australian religions. What's odd is in Judaism and in Christianity, the one God is rather accessible, at least through the covenant in Judaism and through the new covenant in Christianity. And so we pray to God. In some of these other monotheistic religions, they have some backstory about how, for some reason, you can't access God and you have to deal with these lower down functionaries. You're stuck with them, at least most of the time. Like maybe in an emergency, you can invoke God. But I think they're making an analogy with human kingdoms. Like if I just want to go see the emperor or the president or the king, I'm just out of luck. I'm just a schmo. If I'm lucky, I know someone that knows someone that knows someone that knows him. So I'm stuck with dealing with the mayor of my town or whatever. So they're thinking like that. Whereas in Judaism and Christianity, God is rather available. even to the ordinary person, with some mediation in a sense, the priests and the covenant and the mediation of Christ for Christians. So yeah, I disagree with that. There was no that monotheism is a word that doesn't apply to the ancient world. There were no monotheists back then. I just think that's nonsense. It's a confusion based on the ambiguity of the term God in our language, but also in the other languages,
Right. But in Christianity, the role of Jesus as a mediator, and that you can't come to God except through Jesus, which is in the Gospels. So that's very, very pronounced. And then there again, the Jews are going, what do you mean I can't talk to God, ask him to forgive me, confess my sins, and he would have mercy and forgive my sins? It's quite explicit in Tanakh. So
this is a tricky issue for Christians, and I think they go off half-cocked on this sometimes. So, I mean, think about Jesus as one of the Gospels. He tells this story about, contrasting a Pharisee with some sinner, and the Pharisees, thank God I'm not a sinner, and the sinner, goes to worship God and have mercy on me, I'm a sinner, and Jesus says that he goes home justified, essentially.
Right.
So I think what requires the mediation of Jesus is supposed to be the new covenant, but there are people in the world that don't have access to the new covenant, like people that lived 5,000 years ago, or people that never heard of this for some reason. So I think Christians should think that God can interact with people according to whatever information they have access to. Maybe they can't have the new covenant, which is a special thing, but they could still be reconciled to God.
Right, but the new covenant is, in Jeremiah 31, is not referring to a new dispensation or a way that God forgives mankind, or it rather is talking about the return of the Jews. So I could say that Jewish people look at Hebrews 8, where really the book of Hebrews from the get-go is just aiming for that ending of chapter 8. And Jews are going, what are you talking about a new covenant? The new covenant of Jeremiah 31 is that when the Jews return to the land of Israel, they'll not be destroyed. Look at the sun, look at the moon and the stars. If the very foundations of the earth can be measured, so too will I cast off the seed of Israel. So I say this, that even the author of the book of Hebrews, whoever he was, he begins saying, his opening statement in his very long sermon is saying, in the old times, you use the prophets to discern what the truth is, but now we have Jesus Christ. So he kind of concedes that this is a whole new ballgame. And Jews are going, no, there's absolutely nothing new, and we can go directly to God, and the new covenant is not referring to a salvific dispensation that had changed at Calvary. And Hebrews is misquoting Jeremiah 31. So Jews are like very shocked by all of this. And whoever wrote Hebrews, it's a very well-written book. It's very well organized. It's very different than Paul's writings in that it's very systematic. It's very clear where he's going, but where he's going is in an argument against Judaism, and it was probably written before the war, so maybe written in the early 60s, and Judaism was really competition, and he's setting forth a foundation that there's a new covenant, and it's not like the old one of the Jews. It's not an anti-Semitic book, but it's certainly an argument against Judaism.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the new covenant, we're back to one of those stalemate issues, because Paul has all these radical ideas about a new covenant. And they used to think Hebrews was written by Paul. A lot of readers did because, he seems to have some similar ideas. I think nowadays scholars just say, we don't know who wrote it. It wasn't Paul. But, yeah, that's, I mean, what he's claiming is so radical that, the other Jewish Christians weren't sure what to make of it half the time. And probably didn't accept it right away. right? So he doesn't think that he thinks people can be reconciled to God without a full conversion to Judaism and keeping the law of Moses. And well, that's exactly what some of the other ones were keeping at that same time. So it's bold. Paul's making bold claims for sure, and that's really, I think, a nub of a disagreement between Jews and Christians. Is you guys are like, come on, this is just too much, Paul. Plus, he says some very radical sounding things in Galatians and various places.
Right.
Yeah, big topics there.
Incidentally, Hebrews begins by saying that Jesus is not an angel. I don't know why. That's his first. That's his first pushback. He's not. And where does it say that that an angel sat at the right hand side of God? I mean, that's his first. It's a series of arguments that he's superior to, to Moses, so on. Jesus, our Sabbath, Hebrews 4. But at any point, the author of the book of Hebrews is not aware of all these kind of things. But see,
this is a point of connection between us that gets lost, I think, by Trinitarian traditions. So the concept of the Messiah in the New Testament is kind of like a super prophet, like a super prophet even greater than Moses. Again, a radical claim. He's literally called a prophet at the end of Luke. The term kind of drops out of Christian tradition because Messiah is automatically like a great son of God. They're like higher and mightier sounding titles. So it kind of drops out kind of fast. But I mean, it literally says he's a prophet.
Sure. Prophet is not without honor except from his own countrymen.
Yeah. I'm about to have a debate on John 1 with James White, and I've been thinking about that recently. Why on earth, if the writer said that Jesus was God right in verse 1, like, why is he wasting his time saying that this guy is greater than John the Baptist, who was regarded as a mighty prophet by many, many people in that time, many Jews in that time? Why does he bother to say that Jesus is greater than him, or at the end of the passage that, that Jesus kind of brought even greater revelation than Moses did, as great as that was? Well, it's because they think he's a man. That's why. He's just a man in whom God's eternal word, quote, became flesh.
Right. So the question then is, and that I always ask Unitarians, is that you've used the Hebrew Bible as a measuring tool to dismiss the doctrine of the Trinity as a later accretion. So I
use the New Testament more, honestly. But yeah, we do.
I always find that Unitarians and Christadelphians are much more aware of the Hebrew Bible than Trinitarians are. On average, they're much more learned. I don't mean liberal Unitarians. I'm talking about the serious Unitarians. You look back hundreds of years and you see Unitarians that were deeply aware of the Hebrew Bible and were very connected to it. And it was on that basis, I believe, that they utterly rejected the doctrine of the Trinity and very frequently paid for the rejection of the Trinity with their lives, as was Michael Servetus, was murdered by Calvin for being a Unitarian, a brilliant physician, and Calvin had turned Geneva into a police state. And so people gave their lives for this. And these people were very connected to the Hebrew Bible. So it's to the Unitarian that I ask the question, why not apply that same rigorous methodology of the notion that Jesus is the Messiah? Why not have the Hebrew Bible and look for, use the same methodology to determine whether he's the Messiah or not?
I mean, we do believe that there's been further revelation because we're committed to Jesus as a mighty prophet bringing further revelation. And then we believe that Paul, he kind of set the scene for what Paul was going to do, which was to have a covenant that would be accessible to all the nations, to all the peoples. So we do view it as revelation, but not as the most recent, kind of most complete revelation. Just like a Jew looks at, I know the first 5 books are foundational, but you might also think that some things in the later prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, might sort of clarify some issues.
There's no new commandment in Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel. There's nothing like you have.
No, but prioritizing the ethical over the ritual.
Yes, because the problem, right. So there's a reason why everywhere we walk, we see signs about smoking is bad for you, right? Well, why? Because it's a pervasive problem of some 25% of Americans smoke. It's a nightmare, right? So, of course, 1,000 years from now, people look back and say, wow, that is a lot of talk about not smoking and doing drugs. Well, that's not because, other things aren't important, it's just that was a prevailing problem, as was the literature of the 60s was against racism and against Jim Crow, because that was a problem. So the problem of the day was that Jews thought that they can keep ritual law and not care about the widow, the orphan, the weakest members of society. So you and I can easily say, during the days of Isaiah, Jews kept Shabbos and kept kosher. There's not a word of criticism about this. But they really didn't care about – the problem was that there were too many, that didn't care about social justice. So that was the issue. That's why Isaiah never addresses it. People kept Sabbath. It just didn't occur to them. But they thought that if I keep Sabbath, then I don't have to care about orphans. So it doesn't – but there's nothing new, whereas the Christian Bible is introducing something really new, and that is you can't go to God and – say, I sinned, I regret what I did, and I won't do that again. God can't just forgive you. You need Jesus. That's a massive claim, and that really is different. There's nothing like that in the Nevi'im, the prophetic part of the writing part of the Hebrew Bible that conflicts with the Torah. So that's what.
I don't know why I thought about this, but to me, when I look at the history of Christianity, there's a humbling effect it has on me. So if you're a Trinitarian, you might just think, oh, this is all wonderful. What's wrong with those Jews? How come they can't get with the program? And look at us. We rule the world. We've gone from triumph to triumph. I mean, that's not really true. But anyway, they might think that. Because becoming this, they were a dominant force in society, like in the Middle Ages and so on. So we've got all this great, great tradition, and those Jews, what's their deal, And furthermore, in the Jewish Bible, there's just, there's a running battle about obedience. The Jews are falling into idolatry, following other gods, like you said, just keeping the ritual, but not keeping the heart of the matter. Caring about the more important things, and the prophets are always rebuking them and so on. But when I look at the history of Christian theology, in a sense, when I'm looking at Origen or Justin, like he's kind of on my team, but he's also kind of really embarrassing. And it's like we if the Jews screwed up, we screwed up at least as bad and probably a lot worse. Like the whole anti-Semitism thing, like that's just off the charts. Like what the hell? Like, how did that even go down?
That's what.
But the doctrinal stuff, like it's embarrassing.
That's the part of you, incidentally, that surprises me. Nothing you've said to me today surprises me, and what I'm so impressed with is that you can't see the anti-Semitism in the New Testament, and for which I am forced to believe that you are a remarkable man. And I'm not saying this because you're going to give me a tip at the end of this interview.
I don't quite grant that there's anti-Semitism in the New Testament. I
think
there's...
So that's marvelous. I think that I am so flabbergasted that you have such a love for Jewish people, such a kinship with Jewish people. You remind me of Dr. King, who was like that in his speeches, where he quoted texts in the New Testament, which most Jews view it as anti-Jewish, and he didn't see it at all because he had such a favorable view of Jewish people that to him the story of the Good Samaritan There's nothing wrong with the Jews. In his last speech, he said that it was the Jews who passed by the fellow on the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. They just probably thought that there was a guy who was feigning sickness, and then if they helped him, they would have been jumped on. So I am very delighted that people like you exist. And I'm in awe of you, because the Gospels are very well written. The stories are very well shaped. The protagonists, the villains are very clear. And that people like you exist still to this day blow my mind away. And it's a deep admiration for you that I say that, wow, that's amazing.
I think it's a common view that some scholars think that some certain New Testament texts are anti-Semitic. I think if the authors of John and Matthew knew what was going to be done with these texts someday, they would have put some barrier in there. But I mean, in their day, particularly the synoptics, I mean, all the Jesus followers were Jews. So like anti-Semitism isn't a thing. It's nonsense. Like they would have to hate themselves. So they did think that the Jews were wrong in that time and place to reject Jesus. But then nothing follows from that about the rest of the Jews. Like how could it? So they use unguarded language, about the Jews or the Judeans in John. But the context changes everything. When Christians become the big bully on the block, that was so far in the future. Like that didn't really occur to them. Like if it had, they would have said they would have put some guardrails in it, I think.
I am so invested. I am so incentivized not to talk you out of this. I really am very happy that you feel that way. When I look at Matthew 27, the Passion narrative, where the Jews are on one side and Pontius Pilate and his lovely wife are on the other side, pleading with the crazy hordes of Jews that the man is innocent. And the Jews are saying, crucify him, and we take his death upon ourselves and our children. When in John, Jesus is having a lucid conversation with Pontius Pilate in John 19, and he assures Pontius Pilate that he's not the one to blame here. It's those who gave me over to you. It's their sin. I'm very grateful that there are people like you who see it that way. As it turns out, all the church fathers and reformers saw it the way I do, and that is as a complete indictment of the Jew. But there are people like you who have such a favorable view of the Jewish people. It's just not possible that this could be anti-Jewish because you revere the New Testament as a sacred work. And I'm very grateful that you don't see it.
It's different. I mean, you make an important point, which is that the bad guys in the narrative are sometimes, the Jews. But it hits different. The Jews. Yeah, it hits different in a context when all the good guys are Jews too. Right?
There is a fencing.
In a later context, it seems like an appalling thing. Context is kind of everything,
So in racism, there can be a certain inner groove, even though I don't like the blacks, but Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods, they're different, and I admire them.
Yeah, they're the good ones, yeah.
Yeah, so you can have many texts where the text is unfavorable, but there are unique characters, and they're somehow a different kind of, Mel Gibson, when he said he has Jewish friends and they'll vouch for him, even though he was a raving lunatic anti-Semite, a sedevacantist. There always are people. I mean, Hitler thought that his mother's doctor, name is Bloch, was a noble Jew. So that's in the New Testament. Jesus and his disciples were the noble Jews. But when they were in trouble in John 20 on the first Easter Sunday, and Jesus was encountering them, they were hiding in a room for fear of the Jews. That was it, plain. I understand your take on it. At that time, you wish it could have been written a little differently. I love hearing it, and I want your view to be pervasive, but they're not crazy for looking at this and going, wow, those Jews are really demonic.
Yeah, thank God. I'm sure you'll agree with this. Thank God that in the early modern era, Protestants and a lot of them Unitarians rediscovered religious freedom, that people should be free in society to worship God according to their conscience. I mean, this undid the 1,500 years of persecution, or maybe not quite that many, from the 380s up until like the time of John Locke, and even a little bit after. By Locke's time, they weren't burning and killing people anymore. But yeah, we just take this for granted in today's world, and how can anybody think differently? But for a long time, the Christian mainstream, and again, this is profoundly embarrassing to me, just outlawed everybody that didn't think exactly whatever the Nicene Creed said, and relegated the Jews to second-class citizens. You see that even in the Fourth Lateran Council. They have to wear special marks and so on. That's egregious. But anyway, thank God we have so much freedom in so many countries now that we don't have to worry about people killing us for our convictions.
Right.
And lately, the Roman Catholics, when they came to America, they decided religious freedom was the greatest thing they ever heard of. Right. So most of them believe in religious freedom. When they needed it, all of a sudden, they were like, yeah, of course, religious freedom. Like, this is what we've always been for, right? God bless them. I'm glad that they're free to worship. I want them to be, because I think people should have to follow their conscience, their own convictions.
Right. Well, at least the Catholic Church had a Second Vatican Council, a minor reformation, but nevertheless, it was for the better.
Yeah, followed by some apologies relating to anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Yeah. So
they're still they're kind of the masters of changing their tune and then telling you this is what they thought all along. But I guess these are exceptions, because they do own that bad mistakes were made and things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you got to give them some credit.
Well, it's not really. What happened is that Hitler's Pope, who presided for 19 years, Pius XII, who collaborated with the Nazis, forged a diplomatic agreement with the Third Reich. So when Pius XII died, he died on October 9th, 1958. So the church had a big problem on its hand, because he was scandalous. So they did bring in, as the next pope, Pope John the 23rd, who was really a philo-Semite. And that's what the church does. If they have a problem with pedophilia in the church, they just bring in a guy from Argentina to take over and just put a nice face on it. So John the 23rd really had saved Jews during the Holocaust. He genuinely had a very favorable view of Jewish people. So, okay, we have a new pope in. And it's interesting that Pius XII is the last pope to have made an infallible statement ex cathedra in 1950 on the Assumption of Mary. That's the last time the Catholic Church a pope had done that. Mm-hmm. So by attacking Pius XII, you're actually attacking the last ex cathedra infallible statement, because there hasn't been one since then. And that's why you don't mess with Pius. That's why there's such a push among many to elevate Pius XII, and others who are very embarrassed by him. But what do you do with it? Because subsequent popes, like the Second Vatican Council, is not ex cathedra. But that is, it's an ecumenical, absolutely, right. It's very, very important, right. But there are, these tons and tons of people, many of them we know, who are sedevacantists, who reject every pope since Pius XII because of that document called In Our Time, Nostra Aetate, and which it wasn't pro-Jewish, but favorable towards Jews, and said that the Jews of our time are not culpable for Jesus' death, and removing anti-Semitic liturgy from the Good Friday services. When I was a kid, Good Friday, Jews did not go on the streets in Brooklyn. That was the really bad day for us.
That's what my friend Brian Leftout told me.
Right.
That he literally got beat up on Good Friday on at least one occasion, maybe more than one occasion. Yeah,
Right.
that's insane. That boggles my mind.
Yeah. It doesn't, see, for me, I don't know how Jews ever survived in Christian Europe, because they will, but I'm happy it boggles your mind. Thank God there be many more that boggles their mind. But it's, yeah, because they all were, gosh, all the church fathers, they all held these views about the Jews, and they were very confident that the Christian Bible expresses these views about Jews. They all did.
It's pretty grim, yeah. At least by the time you get into the 300s, it's very grim indeed. It's ugly. You have people ginning up the crowd to go burn down the synagogue and things like this. Yeah.
Right. Christians could not burn down synagogues in the 2nd century. They were lucky just to be alive and be able to practice quietly in somebody's home and have a church service. They weren't in any position to burn down synagogues, which would have been a crime against the empire. But by the 4th century, you're quite right, they were burning down synagogues with impunity.
Yeah, you had this kind of ruling class of bishops, too, that had a lot of power and money and could get away with some of these things. And I mean, honestly, I've been doing a lot of research in the whole Nicene era. I just gave a giant lecture in London on basically why Protestants should reject the Nicene Creed and the whole ecumenical council idea, essentially. But one of the things you learn when you study that era is that, bishops of these big cities were kind of like mob bosses. They had thug monk crowds they could sick on you to beat you up or intimidate you. They're grafting money off of grain donated by the emperor to the poor and doing all kinds of they have spies. They're ridiculous. From a Christian perspective, they're ridiculous. Like, this is not like shepherd, elder, pastor kind of role to play. It's really very much like a mob boss in places like Alexandria, Antioch, Constantinople in those centuries.
Right.
So, yeah, like wait, who are we sure like these are like the ruling class? Right, the Pope is one of those guys. The Orthodox think the patriarchs, the archbishops are all kind of on the Pope level, and the Catholics think no, our guy's the top guy because Peter and Paul died in our city. For some reason, this makes him the top guy. But I think Protestants should just get off the boat entirely and we shouldn't believe in bishops.
That's why I agree with you. And that's why I think, this will sound crazy, but that's why I think that the Reformation would have never occurred if there was no Black Plague. Because when the Black Plague occurs right in the middle of the 14th century, not only eviscerates more than half the population of Europe, but some 90% of the clergy in the Roman Catholic Church are wiped out. And that, besides the obvious of what it does to Europe, is a catastrophe of something that's unprecedented, but it weakened the Roman Catholic Church, had an enormous impact on the way people viewed the Roman Catholic Church and the kind of powers they wielded, as you described. And I believe that made it possible that the Roman Catholic Church was so shattered by the Black Plague and the aftermath, that it made it possible for John Wycliffe, who was a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, a great thinker, to publish the first translation of the Bible into English, Middle English. He was translating the Vulgate. But he was really the person who starts the flame of the Reformation. His views were not identical to Luther, but he's really the reformer.
I mean, even when you set aside all the appalling anti-Semitism, the blood libel, and all the nonsense in the Middle Ages, like just the basic Christian scene in the Middle Ages is incredibly depressing to a Protestant when you really like understand how it worked, right? Because your local priest might be illiterate. So he's just going to get up there and babble something in Latin. He doesn't even know what it means. And Christians aren't reading the Bible. And then they have basically a pantheon of saints that they appeal to and magical practices.
Right.
And it's not like a New Testament faith that you see later, like after the Reformation. It's really kind of a grim quasi-Christian paganism. Never mind, you do have learned people that do know about the Bible and so on, but yeah, just the average picture in the village is like super grim. And from our perspective, that's why Christianity didn't really have the effect that it was supposed to have on the world in those years.
Right.
But it started earlier, right? Once it's all holy mysteries and you, the layperson, aren't really allowed to think about it or understand it for yourself. You just have to trust your betters to tell you what words to say.
But where would you, I mean, just think about this for a moment. I'm saying this more for the viewers, you know this, that in the 14th century, where would you even get your hands on a Bible? Let's say you were literate, right? How did you get a Bible? I mean, we don't have a Gutenberg, we don't have a printing press. Luther benefited, and I think that contributes widely to the success of the Reformation. But where did you get a handwritten Bible from? Like where? Where would you?
A book of hours with some Psalms and maybe a few gospel passages in it. Yeah.
To have Codex Sinaiticus, I mean, how in the world are you going to have a handwritten? Who could own something like that? So even we live in a time where everything is accessible. In this period before the printing press, people couldn't get their hands on a Bible. It was just inconceivable. So we're living in a remarkable time.
Rabbi Singer, I really appreciate your time. It's been a very interesting discussion. And again, I appreciate your work, and I look forward to seeing more of it in the future.
Well, likewise, it's an honor to join you, and let's stay in touch. And I look forward to the time where we meet in Jerusalem, and I'll give you a personal tour of this holy city. So thank you so much for having me on.
I would love that. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל